We're live,
Okay, nice. On
hopefully.
both Twitch and YouTube. Yes.
Yeah,
We'll find out later for now.
I know, right? How are you doing?
Good. We're doing this on a Thursday. No, I was gonna say Tuesday.
Oh
Thursday
yeah, good
today.
point. It
Yes,
is not
we've
Friday.
moved. Yeah, we've moved.
It is Thursday. Yeah, we're moving the stream to Thursdays, 3:30-ish Pacific,
Depending
6:30
on when we get to it. Depending on when we get
Eastern.
to it. Yeah. Right. We're bad at starting on a specific time, but
We've
we get
always been
there
bad at
eventually.
that. I've just been screwed up all day today, not being Friday. But yeah, I'm still getting used to it. It's Thursday still. I'm like usually like ready to do something. I usually have something that is planned that we have to run away for quickly, which is why we're moving this.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we have a couple really cool topics. So there's this kind of existential dread that a lot of folks have of, what I
When
just
it started.
feels.
Jump right
I know,
into
right?
it.
Well, there's just this like existential dread of just like nothing seems to happen fast enough, or like
Mhm.
you get kind of bogged down in like
Yeah.
the ick of stuff, and then talk through open source science with open source hardware, which is a
Because
topic.
they're so
So
related. Yeah,
I
they're so
think they
related.
are related because I think the latter
I see. I think I
suffers
see the
from a
connection.
lot of the
Yes.
right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
That's a teaser to stay for the whole
Yeah.
stream.
Yeah. It's a good connection. I hadn't thought
Yeah.
about it till now. But yeah, yeah. I've talked to a few friends this past few weeks, and a lot of them seem to be feeling a bit stuck. We've talked a little bit about it before, but with
Yeah.
whatever the heck is going on throughout the world, and then not really understanding what the heck is going on with AI and all the stuff that people are claiming,
Yeah.
it's a very tough place to be where it seems like nothing you can predict seems to make any sense anymore.
Yeah.
And I've gotten a lot of friends who just feel a bit down about it. So I was thinking through how to combat some of this stuff. So they've all basically lost drive to do stuff because like
Yeah.
you can't predict what's going to happen. So why try and do stuff? And it's that's hard.
Yeah, I would
Suggestions, tips.
right. I would say that at least in the States, and I would say the trend holds for most of the world too, we are changing from an era of extreme predictability into something different.
Almost the opposite. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't know, like, too many people try to predict the future on this kind of stuff. Like, I don't know what's gonna happen. I think the problem with, like, a lot of people I talk to is that we're leaving the old system and they don't like
Mm,
it. And so
mm,
a lot of the, um, observations they have, a lot of the angst is like, "Well, it doesn't work the way that I'm used to it." Well, no, it doesn't.
sure. Right. Right. Yeah.
Sorry.
It's
Like, it just no, but it's really hard for folks to grapple with that, and, like, specifically in America, the current administration is very, like, intent on doing things differently than have been done in the past, and you can be pro
mm,
or against that. It doesn't matter. The reality is that's what's happening, and you
right.
can like that it's happening, and you can not like that it's happening, but the reality is that's what's happening, and it looks like the rest of the world is also kind of following this trajectory, and there's a lot of data that is out there to talk through. We're in the midst of a big generational shift. Like, a lot of the baby boomers are retiring.
Yeah.
Gen X isn't big enough to really count. Sorry, Gen X. Like, you're you're just not. Like, Gen X is in government a little bit, they're in businesses a little bit, but like the reality is it's the elder millennials who are really, running the show at this point, for better or worse, or are the next kind of rung on the ladder.
Mm,
And that's not saying Gen Xers aren't running anything, but it's just from a generational cultural perspective, they're just completely and totally outnumbered.
yeah.
And so we're seeing a massive shift. And so I think part of the reason it's massive is because we're kind of skipping a generation, and that the next
Interesting.
predominant culture coming forward is kind of a skip. Um, the Gen Xers are also a kind of take your lumps and go and not really scream and pull a bunch of attention to yourselves
Mm.
generation.
Mhm.
And so I think part of it's just that temperament of like, it's not, hey, look cool at all the cool shit I'm doing. I'm just gonna do the cool shit and like whatever.
See what happens. Yeah.
Yeah. They didn't really get into social media too much. Like they're kind of like in it, a little aware of it, but like a lot of the younger millennials and like Gen Z grew up on
Mhm.
this stuff. The younger millennial folks, I always separate the millennials because I feel like it's too big of a generation. Like it's always how do you slice it, but
Yeah.
it's like a
People have their
20
own
some year
ways.
difference in generation. And it's like I know people who like can't run a rotary phone who are in the millennial generation. And I'm like, what do you mean? Or like my big
Rotary
thing is
phones.
like pre and post September 11th. And like, did you grow up with internet? Period. And did you ever have access to
Pretty
internet?
good.
Right. It's
Pretty
like,
good. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, I know a lot of folks in a millennial demo that, didn't have it at home, but had it at school or like a library or
Yeah.
something, and it kinda sucked, but it was there and it worked, and then I know a lot of folks never really used the internet, and then I know folks who have never not known the internet, that
Yeah,
wasn't
yeah.
there. And so I kinda think about the generation that way, so I say older and younger, and so that I think, like, we've also usurped so, like, generationally, culturally, and, like, culture within a generation is all the shit you grow up with. So it's all the
Mhm.
popular, um, things, it's who you're raised by. This isn't anthropological by any means, but this is how I think about it. It's not to say that you can't have ideals or exposure to things in other generations, but it's like if you're being raised by the baby boomers, you're gonna have a different experience growing up than if you were
Yes,
raised
then
predominantly by
right.
silent gen or the older
Mhm.
baby boomers. And
Right.
again, the baby boomers are also always lumped together. Like I look at kind of elder and younger, the folks who were literally born in the beginning of the baby boom, like during World War II or the end or like right after, have a very, very different experience than someone who was born in like the 50s or the
Yeah.
late 50s or early 60s, where it was like already booming and you were born into this already booming versus this like you kind of saw it on the upswing as you were growing up, but like your parents were Great Depression people and like you never really had a lot going into it versus
Mm.
your dad comes back from the war and maybe your mom was working in a factory and you have like a pretty good middle class life. Like you didn't have the house, but you got the house built because of all of the boom happening, right?
Mm.
So I think the perspectives matter. So the culture part of that is who's raising you and what values and what you're going through. And like there's regional cultures obviously within countries, even within the world, but like pretty much everybody coming out of, gen or out of in the millennial generation, uh outside of a few very specific places, like communism was basically done at that point.
Mm.
Like there was a lot of exposure technologically. Radio was like, ubiquitous, like information exchange is just kind of baked into this generation. Even if you grew up in some like crazy former Soviet republic where like, didn't have anything, like everyone knew that the stuff was there.
Mm.
And so the exposure is different. So there's a huge cultural difference there. There's a huge um, shift in how stuff is done and built. And so,
Yep.
like the older generation was physical, right? Everything was manufactured. Now our economy is largely digital or knowledge based. So
Knowledge
it's
based.
just
Yeah.
a different skill set. And so what we're seeing is we're seeing a group of people who have kind of grown up in a totally different world, still kind of in control of companies and governments, and they're still trying to usher in rules and they have an operating model of how the world works that is just fundamentally incompatible with reality.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we're seeing
I
that
like
change.
right, right. I like your sociological take on it. It's funny because before we were chatting, and I was like, you're more the history buff between the two of us, and you kind of went through the history
Yeah.
lesson of how that's affected the way things came to now. Um, but yeah, yeah, yeah. That's interesting to see, and I think there's more of a step change when it comes to how things have been evolving in the past, whereas maybe it was a little more gradual. It
Yeah.
does feel like now people are seeing jumps of um, perceptions of what they thought the world was and what the world is turning into, and
Yeah.
it makes it really hard for people
Well,
to grasp.
and the stories of success, the like in America, it's like being able to own a home.
The American
It's
dream, yes,
not
the
really
classical
attainable
American
for a
dream,
lot of
right?
people. And
Yeah,
some
yeah.
people are choosing not to do that, and they're choosing to not make that a dream. Whereas before, I don't think everyone could afford a home who wanted it in like the
Hmm.
boomer generation, but like everybody kind of aspired to that.
Yeah.
There was just kind of an understood cultural, thing of like you want to own your thing and build it or whatever. So we're seeing all this stuff kind of unravel, and what comes out at the end, I don't know, no one can predict the future. The problem I think I have with it, and like where my angst comes from, is that this doesn't really seem intentional. And the reason I
I mean,
say
is
that,
that suggesting changes in the past were intentional?
oh
What do you
yeah,
mean?
100%. Like you look at the founding of America and they were like, we're not doing the
Oh,
monarchy thing
oh, like that.
anymore,
Oh, okay,
right?
something
We're
like that
changing
where
it,
there's like, yeah, yeah, like there's
right?
a movement behind the
Here's a list
direction,
of what we
right?
literally don't
Cohesive.
want.
Got it. Sure. Okay.
And then here's some ideas of what we're going to do, and then we're going to build this document to like rechange how society runs.
Yeah.
And like not that it necessarily needs to be that formal, but I think in generational shifts we're always predicated by like some massive famine or war or something in the
Some,
last
yeah, disastrous
six
event. Yeah.
generations or whatever, right? Like industrialization was kind of in there too, and it kind of
Mhm.
thrust it in. But the promise of industrialization was supposed to be a better life, right? You didn't
Mhm.
have to toil on the farm and starve because your crop died. We were going to figure out a way to have abundance. That was the claim. I'm not saying that's what happened, right? But with whatever's going on in the world now, like kind of post COVID, it doesn't feel to me at least that there is a conceded plan, and I'm not really sure what the better version of the future is.
Mhm.
And so we're seeing, at least again, I can only really talk about the States because that's where I live, but like the administration is unraveling everything, it seems like. Again, you can have an opinion either way or just don't care, but that's what's happening.
Mm.
And I don't understand what the version of that future is supposed to be. And that could be me, but I don't get a coherent plan. I hear a lot of times there is a coherent plan, and then that's just fucking bullshit. There
Yeah.
is no coherent plan as far as I can tell. Um, so that I think drives this even more unsettling because you're like, okay, great.
Right.
Let's just assume everything is broken and we need to tear it all down and start over. Great. What are we going to start with? Or what are we aspiring to? Like, how does this make it better for me?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Or my
Yeah.
family or my community or however you want to gauge success and progress. I'm not hearing that. On the same side, you have all these AI crazy people
Yep.
who are just fucking nuts. Like, I don't know what else to say. Like, the AI is not taking your job. It's not taking over society. It is not going to think. It is not generally intelligent. It's borderline barely intelligent under any
Mhm.
measure that I can come up with. Again, I work with this every day, right? And I know you work with it probably every day too.
Yeah, a
And
lot.
it's an amazing tool, but
Mhm.
it is so oversold. And they're trying to sell this vision of the future. And OpenAI's stuff just got leaked.
Mhm.
And boy, I have never seen a company that has been able to burn so much fucking money in such a short amount of time
Mhm.
than that company.
They deserve a medal for that.
Right? I mean, SpaceX is right up there too. They
Yeah,
just
yeah, I was gonna say.
IPO'd, their financials are out, there's a lot
Mhm.
of questions I have for that too.
Yeah.
And again, don't get mad, like, the actual math doesn't math. They are
Yeah, yeah.
spending more money than they're making, even with all the crazy funny math that they're doing on depreciation and, assumptions on curves and all this there's all this financial shit that I'm happy to talk about if we really wanna get into it, but it doesn't math.
Right,
Like,
and I think
Anthropic
that's
is
oh,
coming
go
out
ahead.
too, and I'm sure it's
Yeah,
gonna be
yeah,
the same
that's
way as
probably gonna be
OpenAI. I
similar.
can't
Yeah, yeah,
imagine it's any different, right? So I'm not trying to
yeah.
just, shit on OpenAI, even though I'm happy to do that all day long.
We know
Um,
that.
but the problem I have with it is great, they're losing money. I don't really care, but they're trying to spin it like we're on the precipice of
Mhm.
creating this crazy utopian that has never been possible before. and Elon's in there too with XAI, which I guess is now SpaceX. I don't know. I didn't really follow that crazy train either.
It's technically SpaceX now, yeah.
But it's just a bunch of people lying. And
Mm,
again, nobody has asked me if that's the future that I want. Nobody uh the way that these kind of changes happened in the past are either like a governance structure changes, so you like elect a political establishment that changes things, or you have a revolution, but the revolutions tend to be principled, right? You have a leader of a
mhm,
revolution, or you have a movement of
sure.
you can have like a confederacy of ideas, and then generally somebody's kind of wins out. It's very rare that you have a, you know, very seldomly is it just anarchy to revolt a society.
It's been proposed several times before, but
Yeah,
yeah.
you can get anarchy in the changeover of a governmental system or even a business system, right? You get a bunch of new executives come in, like this, all this stuff is to me is, you know, that's just kind of how it is. But nobody elected these folks. Nobody's really following them. I mean, I'm sure there's people that are, but like, I think most people who aren't really in tech, when I talk to them, they're just like, what the hell's going on in like
Mhm,
AI land? Are you people okay?
mm,
Is like
um,
oftentimes what I get. But so they're just lying about this future. So there's a vacuum of the lack of messaging, the lack of, I think, tangible results, impact stuff that
mhm,
matters to me. And I think people are also really seeing that like energy prices have gone up quite a bit with this little Iran kerfuffle. Again, you can be for or against it. The reality is the prices of stuff went up and that impacts
mm,
people. And if you have a lot of money, it probably doesn't matter as much, or you probably don't notice. If you don't
right,
have a lot of money, you're probably noticing the price of energy makes everything go up. Food, going out to eat, you know, entertainment, travel, everything gets more
yeah,
expensive. And it should go down theoretically. It might not. People might like the extra margin, might like the extra profit. Theoretically, it goes down. But the reality is shit got more expensive. And again, what am I getting out of that? Right? Is
mm,
what everybody asks. That's the human question to ask is what am I getting out of this? Oh, now I can't fill up my car with gas because it's doubled.
right,
Now what? What do I cut? Right? These are conversations
yeah,
people are actually having consciously, sometimes subconsciously. Sometimes you're like, wow, it was $100 to fill my car up. Maybe I'm not going to go get that dinner out tonight or something. Right. And so I think there's a lot of this subconscious stuff that we're observing that doesn't mesh with our known
mhm,
reality and doesn't mesh at all with what people in power or people in positions of power are saying.
yep,
And so people
I
are just trying to what the fuck
exactly.
it, right?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
yeah,
Right, right. Yeah, and I think that's it. And so,
that's the problem. We're
what?
done. We solve we define the problem, right?
We found the problem. Yeah, I think that's as much as you can say about it. We
Yeah.
found the quote unquote problem, but the solution is not so clear cut. And yeah, talking to these people, these are I think at the end of the day, there's some tenets that you can go back to, but really there's
Yeah.
no real solution to this, right? It's sort of like
I think there's
yes,
a
you have to make
third
those hard
pillar
decisions.
though,
Okay.
right? I think the social media thing we've talked a lot about, but the pillar of social media amplifies all of this shit far more than it should be.
Oh, you're going in the worst direction.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought you were going to propose something for the positive
No,
direction. Got it.
no,
Okay.
I think but I think in order to the only way to solve a problem is to define a problem
Identify what it is, right? Right.
and then
Yeah.
change shit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That ideally don't involve the problem or
Yeah.
uh,
No, but you can chart
address the problem directly.
you
Yeah.
can change inputs of a problem and sometimes get a less bad result. Maybe it
Mhm.
doesn't fully solve what you're looking for. But social media really amplifies all of this. So it amplifies the people in charge who don't seem to know what they're doing or are living in a totally different world. Like you could have a paper route and somehow pay for college is something I hear a lot of boomer politicians in this country say. And I'm
Mhm.
like, that's just not real. It might not have been real back then. It maybe was real. It's hard to say. Maybe it was a really, really good paper route.
Sure.
But no, well, I mean, just to put this in perspective for people in the boomer audience who might be listening, it's like $100,000 to go to a crappy state school now, on average, for 4 years.
Crap. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I mean, yeah, well, like, not Harvard or some Ivy League school, right? Like,
Yes, those are yeah,
right, but
right.
you're just normal college on average is just any college you would go to is on average now about $100,000 to get through. About
Yeah.
half of that seems to be like room and board or like cost of living, and it's really easy to say, "Well, you don't need to live somewhere." That's not real. But, I don't know what a paper route I should probably do the math on this, but I'm assuming a paper route does not net you enough money to pay, what would that be, $25,000 a year in excess?
I mean, you're mixing times, right? Because people don't have
Well
needs for paper routes nowadays, right? So
but my point is that, okay, any job, it's $100,000 to go
yeah,
to
okay,
college for 4 years,
right,
25,000 a
right,
year
right.
roughly, right? So
Yeah,
in
just
order
take
to
minimum
pay for
wage as
that,
something, right? Yeah,
you
take
need a
minimum wage as an
job
example.
that will net you in excess $25,000 so you don't go into debt, or even 20,000,
Mhm.
right? I mean,
Or
I
yeah, so you can afford school, right?
yeah, and so
Yeah,
minimum wage gets you about 35K a year, so you're pretty much not even can't even, like, work and live for
yeah.
free and pay because taxes. So you gotta be I mean, rough math, you'd have to be making probably 120K a year and live pretty frugally and have a good living situation. It's not super expensive to, like, be able to
Mm,
actually, like, "pay cash," quote, unquote, for college. That's not real without a college degree for most people, right? So it's like, if it's the anyway, I'm digressing, but it's this the point that really pisses me off because it's this, um it's such a deep indication that I think a lot of people in the millennial and Gen Z and Gen Alpha generation are seeing that hard work pays off is bullshit,
mm,
right? It's just another piece of evidence, but social media amplifies this problem.
mm.
And you hear these messages, you see the people who are allegedly doing better than you in your age group, and like, yeah, there's always people doing better than you, but like the reality is most people are not, right? The
Right.
reality is the bell curve is 25, 50, 25, and
Yeah.
most people are not doing that much better than you are. But when you are on Instagram all the time or TikTok or any number of these YouTube, I don't really care what your platform is, it's reinforcing a bunch of messages that also aren't real on top of all this other stuff. And I think everybody's just in this overloaded, overstimulated um, world view at this point that it just becomes at the end of the
Mhm.
day. And so I say all this because I think the way to get out of it is actually fairly simple is to stop being on social media,
Yeah, I think we're gonna all agree on that.
get off a goddamn screen. I don't
Mhm.
care. My job's on a screen. When I'm done with work, I'm done with work, right? I don't I sometimes well, if I'm in the middle of
Efficient.
some stuff, sometimes I will like work, kind of like on my phone, so to
Yeah.
speak. But like for the most part, I'm done with screens for the day. But find time to just not have shit to do is huge. Don't listen to music. Don't read, maybe read a book or read a magazine or something. But like the problem with that, a lot of that is it's like any sort of periodical will reinforce the problems of the
Something.
moment.
Sure, sure. Yeah, yeah.
And so I think, like, the better way to do that is to pick up an activity where you can get exercise or something too, like pick up walking or running or hiking or climbing or, like, something where you have to be engaged your mind has to be engaged in a different modality than what you're normally used to. So, like, if your
Mm.
job is, like, biking, like, don't pick up biking as a hobby, right? Pick up, like, something else. But it has to be something
Yeah.
that, isn't involving a screen or ideally involving current events or near-term events.
Mm.
I want people to be informed, but, like, if your hobby is reading about all this shitty stuff that a political party is
Yeah, it's
doing, like,
probably not
that's not
doing anything for you.
helping.
Right, right. Yeah.
Um, and there's a lot of great Substacks in the world, there's a lot of great YouTube content, but a lot of that content tends to focus in on the crap that's perpetuating it. So you have to get out of it. And the problem with a lot of this stuff too is that um, you have to get away for your mind to rest in an active state. So again, if you're biking and you're
Mm.
not listening to something and you're just really focused on the road, or you're horseback riding and you're really focused on the horse, you're using different pathways in your brain and you're giving all that other pathways of rest. Whereas if the way that you unwind is you read a bunch of stuff, you're still using those active reading pathways that are the same pathways that are engaged when you're reading tweets or watching Instagram and whatever it is, right? So you have to kind of break yourself out of that modality to give yourself a rest, and then you'll start to see that it's hard to do, right? It's
Yeah.
really hard to sit with yourself, and then you'll be like, "Wow, this is hard." It shouldn't be hard. You should be able to sit with yourself for hours at a time and just be fine. That's what people used to do,
Uh, maybe back in the day, but yeah, it's gotten really hard
right?
to do that. Yes.
They used to just be what we called normal. Now it's boring.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you have to do it for hours a day, but you should be able to sit for 15 minutes on a park bench and be fine, right? Like, and not feel like you need something. If you feel like you need something, you're probably addicted to it. Oh, I need my phone. Yeah, you don't really need your phone.
Mm, mm,
And then
mm.
you build in all these excuses. Well, what if somebody tries to get a hold of me? Then you'll call them back later. You'll text them back later. It's
Mm.
fine. What if some emergency happens? Well, what are you going to do about the emergency on the park bench?
Exactly. Right,
Right.
right.
And so
What
you
do you
have
do
to
with the hardware?
yeah, you have to
Yeah.
disengage with this. And like, I mean, secondarily, we need to have we as people need to demand from the people who run shit that they need to give us a plan and we need to say on the plan. And so for government, like both
Ah,
political
okay.
parties, as far as I'm concerned, in America at least, don't have a fucking plan.
Mm,
They have
okay.
ideas, cool, but we need plans now. We're
Mm,
beyond the idea phase. Like we need to actually execute. There's a lot of problems that we have that are some real and some imagined, and like we need tangible things to get out of it. And then the same is true for like these AI companies and all this other noise of these thought leaders within our society. No one elected you. I don't care what you have to say. And if you are going to say shit, we need to demand. Okay, great. You're going to get the pathway to AGI. What's that detailed timeline look like?
mm.
Right?
Yeah,
If
there
you're
have been
actually
proposals
going to do
before. Yeah,
it,
yeah. Yeah, there have been
right?
proposals, I will say. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, give me a timeline and don't and it can't be magical,
Mm,
right? And I think that's the again, ideas versus execution. We need to be forcing people through the lens of execution.
mm.
Okay, you're going to give me a robot that does everything. Well, robots can't do shit right now and AI can't do shit either. So like what's the next big step that I should be looking for? And they don't know. Probably because there isn't one, but
I mean,
that's a
even if they had a
whole
plan, there's no guarantee they could stick to the plan, right? You talk about full
no,
full
but
full self-driving and
well, but I mean, Elon's been really on that, right? And it is,
mm,
I mean, how do you define full self-driving? And people get
sure.
into arguments, but I think he's gotten a little bit far ahead of reality on that. But the reality is like the first self-driving was dog shit
Mm,
10 years ago or whatever. It's gotten miraculously better. Last time I was in a Tesla version 4 or level whatever the hell, it pretty good. It wasn't perfect,
mhm,
but pretty good.
mm.
Right. So fine. Okay, we're gonna get you pretty good. Great.
That's the
When are
plan.
you gonna get me from
We'll
pretty
get you
good to
pretty good.
perfect, right?
That's
Yeah,
our
that's
roadmap.
that's
We'll get you pretty good.
yeah, yeah. So we need to be demanding plans for people, and then we'd have like the when it comes to the politics stuff, like the people who are actually doing shit and are going to be here for more than 20 years need to be in charge of stuff, right? Like
Yeah.
we have to have the generational handoff. It's going to be messy, but I don't know what else to say. Like I think the biggest problem we have in America right now is that the people in positions of power and the people running the country and government are just too old to understand how the time works,
Mm,
right? And not all of them, but I'm going to lump them all in. And it's like if you're unhappy with how America is today, you have to look at who's been running it for the last 10, 20, 30, 40, in some case years. It's the same goddamn people.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Deep,
Right?
deep.
So we
Yeah.
need new ideas. We need new people. I don't care if they're Republican, Democrat, Independent, black, blue, green, yellow party. I don't give a shit, right? We need
Mm,
different ideas and we need different people to do stuff. Because we can't we know it's like it would be like if we had people running on the World War II platform of we're just gonna build America's problems away, right? It's like, well, that worked when
mm,
there was no competition in the world because everything was bombed,
mm,
but it doesn't work in 2026. Like I want to see manufacturing come back to America and people be able to build shit here too, right?
mm.
That would be awesome. I don't think that that is going to be anywhere near what it was in the past. I don't think it's real. And from what I understand, high tech manufacturing, it's robots anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
right? You don't have hundreds of people walking into the factory with no skills in the factory and learning on the job, and, like, I don't think that's
Uh,
real anymore, right? I do think there's a variation of that, that is real because we still do build stuff.
yeah, yeah, right, yeah.
And I was driving down the road the other day and I saw a billboard for some, fabrication plant in the area here, and it was paying, like, I don't know, 30 some bucks an hour.
Mm,
I was like, "Shit, that seems," and they're like, "No, no,
no experience
education
required. Yeah,
required."
yeah.
And so I looked at that, I was like, "Shit, that's, like, pretty good." All I hear is there's
We're
no jobs,
we're
right?
gonna find you in a factory soon.
Maybe. I mean, but the caveats were that, no criminal record, right? So and I
Sure.
think you had to have a GED or a high school diploma.
Basic education, yeah.
Yeah, and then, they did want some experience if you had it, but they were like, "It's not required, it's just helpful." And then it was working in a clean room, which is definitely not for everybody, you gotta be in a bunny suit, and then it was
Yeah.
also,
That's
you
fun.
start on the swing shift, and so f
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
so for
That's rough.
folks
That's
yeah.
rough.
Yeah, so I think you went in at, like, 7 PM and got done at, like, 3 AM or something,
Yeah.
and they but you got a pay differential, right? So you got a couple bucks more an hour for that, and then, the thing I thought was really cool with that position too is that they give you stock equity right out the gate.
Oh, okay.
So on top
So
of your
this is a public company
28,
that we're
30
dealing with.
bucks an
Yeah.
hour, yeah, you
Wow.
get I don't it wasn't a lot, but I was like, "It's really cool that you get stock grant as a entry level employee with no college education." Like, that's really awesome.
Hey, yeah, they know what they're doing, or
Yeah, so
they know
so
what they
that's
need to
a
be doing. Yeah.
that's a viable career that, you could walk into theoretically with no experience with a high school diploma and have a pretty decent middle class life and dare I say, like, go up the ladder. Not glamorous.
I
But
was gonna say
again,
middle class life, right? As if
we're
middle class
probably
existed.
yeah, but we're talking probably about dozens of people and not
Right.
millions of people or thousands of people, right? So it's like I don't think the scale of manufacturing is ever gonna come back to that, but we need people with different ideas. But I think that's an interesting segue. So, like, how do I don't know what the solution is. I think there's strategies to mitigate, and I think being
Sure.
aware of the problem and being aware of the inputs of the problem are are all you can do, and then you gotta be honest with yourself. If you can't be honest with yourself, you're screwed, so good
Yeah.
luck.
I mean, we have been talking primarily in an American context, but I do think
Yeah.
there's something happening globally where it's just this everyone's feeling this sort of change, and that may be heavily focused on certain
Yeah,
superpowers
because
or
we
not.
have some
But
of the oldest leadership in the history of the world
mm,
everywhere, right? That's why I'm
yeah,
picking on the
everywhere.
boomer
Right.
generation because they China,
Hmm.
Russia,
Russia. Yeah.
America,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think Canada, I think he's Gen X now.
I
I think
think he recently rotated, right? Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
but France, like,
Mhm.
Macron might be Gen X, but he's that weird, like, younger boomer, older Gen
Yeah.
X, like, um, everyone else I can think of, UK is maybe Gen Xy now, but the problem you have when people say, "See, it's different," it's no, because those people in the elder rungs of the Gen X group are effectively boomers. They've had all of the boomer life effectively, um, happen to them. And the generational split isn't some, like, magic, like,
Yeah.
cutoff. It's like if you're
Gotcha.
61, you
Yeah.
have this radically world different experience. But the people even in most Gen X people, most of them had the opportunities to get almost all their college paid for through state means, and the younger you are in that generation, the less help you got. And so a lot of the people in Gen X saw the ladder kinda get pulled up from them in this country. I
Mhm.
can't speak to everybody in the world, but it seems like it's pretty similar everywhere else. Everyone kinda got screwed. Whereas the millennials, even the older millennials, almost there was no ladder at that point. The ladder was effectively gone. And, like, yeah, maybe you got scholarships for college and had a lot of it paid for because there was still some of the social services left, but, like, you didn't really have a very different lifestyle. So I think it's this cultural problem of the generational change, and it's
Mhm.
the things that these people, I mean, the people who are running the world today grew up in the shadow of nuclear war,
Sure. Yeah.
right? In the Cold War, and some of them grew up in communism.
Mhm.
Like, Some of them still are in communism, but for them, like
Yeah.
the USSR was a real thing that is no longer a thing, and it's
Right.
nothing. It's not
In
anywhere
some
even
people's
close to
life,
what it
yeah, in some
was.
people's lifetimes of transition, right? So
But
yeah,
Putin
they're
and a lot
forever.
of the people in Russia are running the country like it still is.
Yeah.
It's just if you've lived, if you've grown up and have never known it, I think you probably have a different set of priorities than if you grew up trying to relive it, or try or had kind of, I guess I don't know if you would be old enough to like have seen it happen. There's some people alive today who did see the rise of it,
Mm,
but they would have been really young.
mm.
Right, they would have known life before the USSR, during USSR, and then post. And same with America, like, there are some people alive today, they're very few, but, like, they know what life was like before World War II,
Mm.
and so they're living in a totally different frame. Most of them are not running the country, although there's a few people in Congress who are, like, close to 90.
Yeah, yeah.
But, I
I
mean,
mean,
think about it, right? Like, most people who were in World War II, who fought or even, like, served and like, in the factories that built shit, they're not alive anymore.
mhm.
Right? And, like, the people who grew up directly after hearing those stories are, but, like, can you imagine, like, trying to live the world like you just build your way out of the problem in
Yeah, I mean, I
2026?
think,
Like, it just doesn't.
yeah, that's why I thought it was like a worldly problem because I imagine sort of like if you imagine different layers of the earth or something, and different layers move at different rates, right? So you do have this under political realm which
Yep.
is slowly moving, and then you have something like culture changes, which are maybe a little bit faster, and then you have like technology, which seems to be changing crazy
Well,
fast.
no, and that's a great
Yeah.
point, right? Is the technology, like, my grandparents grew up without TV.
TV. Yeah, yeah. I was gonna say
Like,
TV
it
over
was a
radio,
thing,
video,
but
video.
nobody
Yeah,
had
yeah,
it, right? It was a
yeah,
novelty,
yeah, yeah,
and, like, they barely had radio.
yeah. Right, right.
And I'll never forget when I showed my grandpa a picture of his house from space. It just
Wow.
it blew his mind, right? Like,
Aliens.
I know, right? I found a satellite photo, and then, like, his truck was parked out in the lawn, and he must have been doing something, like, yard work or something, and he just, like, could not believe that that was his house from space.
Yeah, yeah,
So he's literally gone from space wasn't a thing we did, Sputnik, all that shit, right? And then, like, literally seeing, and I have, like, real time, but you could do it real time now too. You could run a satellite and see like, that level of technological progression in one lifetime is mind-blowing, and the
yeah.
people who are trying to run the world are, like, living in a world
Right.
that, like, they don't even grok.
That. Yeah. Exactly. Right. Right. Yeah.
I think, like, part of what we were gonna talk through, like, the open source science and open source hardware, that movement came out of an era that a lot of the, well, like, the whole, I mean, the open ideas have been around forever, but, like, the
Mhm.
modern open source movement as we, like, understand it today, I think really came out of people who were going through, like, Vietnam War era
Yeah. I
stuff,
was gonna say
fall of
Darwin research.
communism.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
so the government was
Hmm.
throwing in a bunch of money trying to figure out how to, like, grow systems. You had a lot of information disclosure problems with the Vietnam War. A lot of people, the counterculture ideas were out there. Like, there very few people were actually like hippies, but it's like everybody was a hippie in the 60s. And it's like the reality was, like, not really true. But those
Mm.
ideas really permeated the culture, and, like, openness and acceptance and peace and love and all this kind of idea was really out there. Um, and then with communism and the USSR, and keeping information, like, totally and completely, like, we've talked a little bit about Chernobyl, I think, in the past, where they didn't
Yes. Yeah.
even
Yeah.
admit there was a problem until Sweden was like, hey, we have a lot of radiation in our atmosphere and we're not really sure why.
Yeah.
Like, and so the modern, open source movement, I'm not a historian on this, obviously, but it comes, most of the people in that movement were, I would say, inspired by either the beatniks and or the hippies. And so they were
Beatnik. I've
of a
never heard of
certain
the term. Okay.
age. Yeah, the
Yeah, yeah.
beatniks predated the hippies. No one talks about
Oh,
the
I didn't know that.
beatniks.
Okay,
Yeah.
I did not know that. Okay,
Yeah, you should
sorry. We'll just move
Google it. That's
on.
a fascinating group of people, man. A lot of the stuff I think in our society that we attribute to like um the 60s and 70s is actually really beatnik ideas that were
Ah,
either
okay, interesting.
permeating through or like directly inspired a lot of the people in those in that time.
Yeah,
And I believe to be a beatnik, you have to be silent generation or greatest generation. So you would have been, teenager in World War One or shortly
mm,
thereafter,
mm.
or like a younger kid kind of coming out of it. So like your worldview was kind of shaped through like what the hell was that? And let's never do that again. And then 10 years later it happens again and you're like, oh my God, we're doing it again. Why are we doing it
Yeah,
again? Right.
right.
Um, so I think the historical context matters, but yeah, the idea that you should be able to just like, give stuff away or like have abundance
Share
because
information. Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So that's a really I think that can be a good pathway to get out of this kind of problem set too is
I agree.
like
Right, right.
but we were kind of talking a little bit before this too and the problems with open source though are the old system, which is kind of the current system, is that you don't build it yourself. You
Mhm.
outsource it to another person or another company. You put all of the risk and support onto that entity. And
Can I take a step to try and like bridge the gap because I
yeah,
think you mentioned something which I feel like is important to call out because
yeah,
we were going from this place where it felt like none of us were making any decisions that seemed to be going in directions that we wanted, and the bridge between the historical context of where open source came from or like where the internet was started was really a lot about sharing
yeah,
ideas and sharing knowledge across cultures, across countries, right? I think actually that's a beautiful gap of like how you get out of something like this where
well,
you feel like nothing you're doing makes any sense is you start getting involved in communities and you can build these if things go right, right? And
yeah.
then we'll transition back into where everything is.
I
But
I
there
I don't
was a
wanna
time.
rain on
Oh,
that
okay, okay.
idea, but I mean, the real precipice for the internet and this idea was actually, ARPANET,
Yes.
which was the idea there's a lot of different rationales for it, but I think the predominant one was what do we do if command and control is severed? Like if the Russians nuked Washington, DC,
Sure,
how do
sure.
we nuke them back? Well, we need a decentralized, autonomous
But I
communication
think
system so that we
the
can
idea
nuke them
behind
back,
it,
right?
the idea behind it of the decentralization or being self-sufficient in management is, I think, part of what as I think is so appealing about open source is you build these communities that provide you have a good enough idea, everyone contributes and it grows into something like Linux, right? Like so there
I like
are
your version better, but I'm right.
this is your cast, man. So
No, I no, I no, I mean, I'm kind of being funny, but I am actually right. The necessity of open systems so I think it's like, how do you make decisions like that? Well, people rag on the United States military a lot. They're very, very good at executing
Mhm.
if they have a goal that
Sure.
is,
Yeah, yeah. Right.
executable, right? Um, all the politics and shit aside, that they're probably the best in the world at making shit happen if they need to make it happen. And so the problem was like, again, how do we nuke them back, basically? What was interesting was the solution to that problem was a system that wasn't controlled, that
Mhm.
was open,
Right.
right? That was self-organizing, and the internet is still kind of self-organizing, like BGP, some of these other protocols get kind of tampered with. But like the original idea was that no one node controlled everything. And
Yeah.
if stuff went down, how do we make sure that we can just, you know, circumvent the thing that's down so that we can still communicate?
Yeah.
And that's
Right.
like the predecessor. It's like they probably paid a bunch of scientists to figure this out. when they did. That's what happened.
So, yeah, isn't that what happened? Yeah.
But I think it was kind of 2 points, and again, I could be totally wrong on this, but my understanding of it was that we were paying these DARPA people to try to figure this out. But and around the same time, a lot of their collaborators were working on shit at universities, and they were like, "How do we just get information to our buddies
Yeah.
in Ottawa?" Right? It's like it takes 20 days to mail shit. Like, how cool would it be if we could just exchange information or like messages, or phone calls are expensive. Like, how do we, do this? And like electronic mail and like all this stuff that we now take for granted was all developed partly out of necessity, but partly because the ARPANET idea was designed initially to be open, modifiable, and routable, which is the predecessor to open source.
Mhm.
And like the predecessor, I think it's even before that, the United States system of information gating is patents. And we decided 100 years ago or 200
Mm,
years ago that patents would also become open source, right? The
mm,
original intention was that you were granted the ability to have an exclusive right to your idea or thing, make some money, and then it would go to the rest of the society because the universities that you
yeah.
worked with to build it, or the people who got educated at the universities, were part of America, and everybody should benefit from that. But you need to make some money too. And so I would
Mm.
say like those ideas kind of spiraled into this, like what we would now consider like open source or open
Yeah,
community.
yeah, and that's the perfect segue into the
Yeah.
description of what we're talking about is the state of open source now, and yeah, where does it go? It's specifically open. I think we were talking specifically open
Yeah.
hardware, but open source software has a longer history, and we've seen it go through various phases. Um,
Well, but
but you had an idea
it
you were presenting.
hasn't, it hasn't though, right? Because it's like
I mean, I think it's been in circles in some
it's science
sense.
manifest is how I kind of think about it. Cause like, how do you get anything done if you're inventing something? Well, if everything you're working on in a science lab is closed and you have no ability
Mhm.
to modify it or interact with it, you're never going to invent anything.
Yes,
Like
right.
scientists are notorious for like tearing shit apart, and like the microscope doesn't quite get me the focus I need, so I like replace the glass to, make it
Mhm.
better or whatever. Like the original telescope, right, was famously done that way as well. Um, but no, the point I was going to make was that the um, the way that things used to work slash work today is very much the old system, which is the current system of you outsource everything, right? You hire the
Yeah,
expertise,
labor
you get rid of the
arbitrage. Yeah.
liability, you get a contractor. And part of this, I think, is you can argue specialty is better a lot of times, and in order to get a specialty, or to get focused knowledge, you have to specialize in something. But the
Sure.
problem is we've taken that, I think, too far into like everything is now specialized. Like subcontractors of subcontractors. And so to try to get anything done at like a large scale is become bureaucratic and impossible. I think the part of the reason for that was that the boomer generation had so much abundance, had so many people. You could
Mm.
afford as a cultural society to say, yeah, you're a steam plumber. Well, I'm a liquid water plumber, so I'm going to
Yeah, yeah,
specialize
sure.
in
Okay,
steam. You're going to
right.
specialize in wastewater. Whereas it used to just be the plumber did it
Plumber, right,
and they
right.
figured it out. And maybe it wasn't always perfect, but they got it done, right?
But I think those specializations do naturally emerge from the increasing knowledge base that we have, right? So if you think about medicine specifically, once you start learning more about the human body, the one single doctor just doesn't cut it anymore. You need to have someone that knows this particular subsystem or that one.
Yeah, but yeah, I think over specialty is very much a thing. And I think our current system incentivizes specialty.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that may
I
or may
mean,
not be wrong, but I think the reality is that we can't do that anymore. We just literally don't have the people.
mhm.
And we don't have enough of we don't have enough of the right resources to be able to do that. And so what I'm trying to do is bridge it to open source being
Yeah,
critical,
I see where
right?
you're going with it, but I
Yeah.
actually we were talking about it. I think medicine is a prime example of that of the specialization, and we can't sustain that. But maybe that's another talk
Yeah.
for another
Yeah, I
time.
have a lot of opinions on that. But the point is like we the old method slash the current method is specialization and outsourcing risk.
Yeah,
And we're having to go back the other way to
we
uh
should be going back the other way. I would
yeah,
say.
well,
Yeah,
I also think like antitrust and vertical integration was really frowned upon because a lot of the people um building society like post Rockefeller, which was like the big antitrust vertical stuff, there was a huge backlash um
monopolizing. Yeah,
on monopolization and verticalization, as there should be. Monopolies are absolutely atrocious for everyone,
mhm,
100%. But so I think there was a little bit more of a push to like specialize and then kind of shut off. And so you see a lot of the companies like Bell Labs, GE,
yeah,
they all kind of, they didn't, well, GE is a really interesting one because like they never really got rid of stuff. They just, they compartmentalized it more into like sub
yeah. It became
companies,
something else. Yeah, just
which
became
was an
something
interesting,
else. Yeah,
but like,
yeah,
but the GE is really just a holding company of all these different companies that do other stuff, but also the heads of those business units are autonomous. They're effectively companies, right? So
yeah,
they've
yeah.
like
Right.
they've kept the brand, so to speak, and they've been able to keep the knowledge and be able to intersperse, but it's very rare for that to succeed. So that's kind of where we're at now, but where we're having to go back to is again the despecializing.
The generalization. I think that's the opposite. Instead of
I think
specializing, you're generalizing.
despecialized.
Okay, cool. That's what we're going with. We're despecializing.
Yeah, we're despecializing ourselves. Uh, but it's never been easier to do that. And like part of the problem that led to specialization was that the ability to share information, like to the
Yeah,
plumbing thing
yeah.
is a
To
great
learn off of that.
example.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was in an old bookstore and there was a plumber's manual and it was like literally like 4 inches thick. And it literally, no, this was, I should have bought it because it was a really cool thing, but like it was from like the 1920s
Yeah.
and
Nice.
it had literally anything and everything you could have
About
possibly
plumbing. Yeah,
thought
yeah,
about that would run through a pipe in
yeah,
there. How do you off gas this kind of gas, nitrogen or carbon dioxide, and what they had the actual calculus of like flow rates and all this shit in there. And it was because the plumber person would just come out and be like, I don't know what the fuck nitrogen gas pumping. Let me pull up my little plumber book that, has some information in there. And I've never done this before, but I'm gonna try to figure it out and it'll probably work. But, you had to have the plumber and the plumber had to have a book. Now I can Google it or probably ask AI and it will be 80% correct.
yeah. Statistically, 80% correct. Yes. Or give you 80% of the accurate information
Yeah.
that you're looking for.
Well,
Yeah.
right. But I mean, I'm joking a little bit, but like that used to be the problem. And now we don't have that problem anymore. And I think what we're seeing is like, we've talked about this before too with AI specifically. AI has never made it easy. It has never been
Yeah.
easier to build something than now with AI.
Right.
Built like coding is it's still hard. There's still some traps you fall into, but like pretty much anyone can drum up some code that'll work-ish.
Yeah.
That used to be the hard part. It's like I have this
Yeah.
really great idea and it's going to make me billions of dollars, but if I just had an engineer, well, you don't have that excuse anymore, and there's apparently not a lot of billionaires happening.
Mhm.
Um, because the execution is still hard. And like we were talking about with hardware a couple of weeks ago, I think it was like, yeah, it is okay with it, right? Like
Yeah.
it's getting there, but we're actually getting with 3D printing and like chips being available,
Yeah.
well, other than like memory.
Yeah. I was gonna say, depending on what chip you're talking about, most chips are
Some
not even. Yeah.
chips,
Yeah.
yeah. We're actually in an era now where you can custom build software and you can custom
Yeah.
build hardware.
Yeah. Yeah. Mhm.
And I think that the only barrier that we really have here is like the creative energies to do it. and the understanding of the possibility of doing that, right? I think there's so many people who run businesses where they're like, I don't want to do this. I'm going to outsource it. That costs money. And there's your competitive edge. So if I need a specialized gizmo to, I don't have a coffee roasting, specialized gizmo to roast my coffee, and everyone else has a specialized gizmo to roast their coffee, well, that's not really a competitive edge for me. That's just like par for being a coffee roaster. But if I can come up with a specialized gizmo that roasts my coffee better and then maybe like bags it faster, now I can do a higher throughput,
Mm,
or I can control the quality of my coffee better, or I can change how I want to do stuff, right? And I think that is like a huge thing that's really hard for people to grok as well, is like, yes, you then have the risk of the gizmo breaking and then you having to figure out how to fix it. It's also never really been easier or harder or easier to do that. But now you have the ability to create um, differential, right?
mm.
So AI is going to make everything easier. So everyone, and there's going to be 100 coffee producers or coffee roasters use
Yes,
this,
yeah, yeah.
right? Great.
Slightly different.
I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that's awesome. How do you differentiate yourself if everyone's using the same coffee roasting machine? Well, you don't really.
Mm,
I mean, maybe the beans, but like there's only so many places that grow beans. So, like, okay, packaging, branding only takes you so far. And once everybody gets overloaded with the million fucking coffees on the shelf, you're
mm,
going to have to figure out a better, because branding is now irrelevant.
yeah.
And that's the next phase of this AI bullshit we're gonna see. We're gonna see an app for everything, and then it's gonna be the brand and the pretty label and the color and the box and all this stuff, and that'll matter until people finally figure out that, well, this
It's all the
app is
same.
basically the
Yeah, yeah,
same as this app,
yeah.
and this app's cheaper, so now we're competing on price, and now it's a race to the bottom, and then eventually you'll hit the bottom of AI costs certain amount of money to do, and that'll
Mhm.
be the bottom, and anyone who can figure out a way to marginalize that will maybe make a little bit of money.
You could argue that
Or
that might be a good thing when it comes to AI, but yeah.
yeah, but it's also, but then how do you differentiate? Well, you start inventing shit. And in a physical world, like the software world's really challenging, folks. Like, good luck.
Mhm.
But in the physical world, if you can marry custom software and marry custom hardware development, I think you're in a we've never seen like a high tech society be able to just manufacture high tech before.
Oh,
We're,
interesting.
I think, going to be in the onset of a new industrial revolution.
Yeah, I don't. There have already been terms likened to that thrown around already, with AI being the
What?
spearhead of that movement.
I thought I was special.
No, people have been calling this AI revolution the next industrial revolution,
Yeah,
for
but
lack of a better term.
has
But
anyone
it's
called it the
overgeneralized. I think yours is more
de-specialized
specific.
revolution?
The de-specialized
Gotta write my piece in the Atlantic real quick. Gotta coin that term.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have a good point. I mean, there are many nuances in this, of course, but I think calling out the idea of being able to now effectively build the entire stack, um, is something that a lot of people didn't have the capability to do before.
Yep.
And very honestly, going back to some of the stuff we are talking about at the start, a lot of my friends who were feeling that rut ended up trying to go and do their own things because now it's easier than ever.
Yep.
So they found the passionate thing that they cared about, and then ended up working on that because that was the only thing they could really control. So,
Yeah. Well, and I think to like how does this stuff get adopted? If you're running a coffee bean business now, let's say, or coffee roasting business, there's, food grade certification stuff you have to pass
yeah.
to use stuff. And some of these certifications and stuff are good, but a lot of these systems of bureaucracy have come out of an era that doesn't make sense anymore.
Mhm.
And they're now barriers to adoption. And part of the bureauification of society has been regulations and standards. And
Yeah.
then once you have a regulation and standard, then you start using that to make things safe. And then we get into what I would argue is like over engineering the standard.
Yeah, we should have another cast about that. The idea of standards and certifications, I
Yeah.
think is just so interesting. It's a very, very
Yeah, and I'm not against it,
interesting
right?
space. Yeah.
And I think it's important, but we're the big barrier is if you're an industrial plant building industrial stuff, you have to have there's all these ISO certifications you have to
Yeah. Yeah.
conform to a lot of times.
Right.
And, your home built machine might not be that. Or what the reality of all these certifications is they cost money.
Exactly. That was what the cast would have been about if we had that cast.
Yeah, they cost money, and it's really just a gating institution, and it
Right.
actually then becomes prohibitive for people from trying stuff. Sometimes for good reason, like, we don't wanna burn down the building because I think I can wire very well and build an electrical
Yeah.
appliance, so we have, like, the UL standards, and there's ISO
Right.
standards and that kind of stuff too. But we have to rebalance that again
Yes, I
to
agree with that.
form to a world where I can 3D print just about anything I could ever conceive of in my house. I don't actually
Right.
do 3D printing. I have a lot of friends who do, but like,
I
y
do. Yeah. It's
yeah,
fun.
right? But and you can 3D print metal too, right? Like, you
Yeah,
can
yeah,
build,
yeah.
like, durable stuff. They
Mhm.
3D print stuff for space.
Yeah.
So it's like, we have to change how this setup is to make it make sense for today, and what I'm all I hear is, like, we have to throw it out or we have to stay with it, and I'm like, there's
Yeah.
always room in between. But when you have the people who don't even understand what I just said about 3D printing or
Mhm.
realize, like, they'll think it's scary, and I think it's an amazing opportunity for everyone to be able to, like, build anything that they could dream of, right? Like, if
Yeah.
you want your own personalized cup, why not?
Yeah.
Right? Like, I don't have to go to IKEA and get the same cup as everybody else wants. If that's what you wanna do, cool. But, like, why not, right? Like, people always say, "Well, why would you do that?" Well, some people have big hands and don't have cups that fit really well, or small hands, whatever the problem is,
Creative
right?
expression too, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
No, yeah, yeah.
And instead of saying, and putting up all these barriers, we gotta rewind the barriers, but we don't wanna just get rid of everything. We don't want you to have a non-food safe cup that's gonna, like, leach plastic into your water or
Yeah.
soda or whatever, right?
Right,
That'd be
right.
a good cast to talk about, like, regulations and, like, how do
Yeah,
we,
yeah.
like, untangle this shit in a logical way so that we still have protections, but, like, not completely kill everybody who has an idea to let them experiment. I'm like, spoiler alert, it's ramping regulation, but, like, that's a whole
No, I think it's a good cast. I think I have a lot of opinions from the technical side as well, and
yeah.
you're more on the political spectrum, so
I've worked
it'd
in
be
this
very fun to
shit
talk
for
about.
too long, like,
Yeah,
dealing with bureaucracies and regulations, and it's like it's like everything always makes sense initially, and then you get 20 years down the road and everyone's like, "What the hell? Why are we doing?" It's like we don't wear
yeah,
tunics anymore. That was super common in Rome, right? It's like worked really well for them, but we're not doing it. So why do we keep clinging to all these rules that were made by people who don't even live in the reality we do? Like, there's a lot of these regulations we have come from, like there's
yes,
I'll
yeah,
put it
yeah,
this
yeah,
way.
yeah.
There's always, like, in the gift shop, right? There's always some book that's like, laws that
Laws that
don't
don't
make
make any
sense
sense.
anymore.
Yeah,
Like, you can't
yes,
eat
yeah,
apple
yeah.
pie on a horse on a bridge in Maine or something like that. And you're like, what the hell does that even mean? But we don't in our society, we're very additive,
Mhm.
but we're not
We talked about
iterative,
this before. Yeah, but we're
right?
not subtractive either, right? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Iterative is or subtractive, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's something that we've brought up before, several times before.
Well, and it's yeah, it's just progress fundamentally has just become change.
Mhm.
And that doesn't mean it's better or worse because no one's actually measuring it. It's just progress is just change. Well, we changed it, so we made progress. But
Yeah,
that's not really what
and that's not
progress
always
means,
true.
right?
Right, right. Yeah, yeah.
I stole that from a friend. I told him I was gonna use it on the podcast, and I don't think I
There
did
you go.
yet.
Oh, oh.
So I got it in.
Oh, you got a check mark there. Done. Task completed.
Task complete. I made
Yeah,
progress.
yeah.
All
Nice.
right, let's leave it there. We'll be back
Yeah.
Thursday,
Yes, Thursday
and
from
we'll
now on.
we'll try to keep it to a half hour, but
Roughly
this was a double topic. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, roughly this time-ish or 2 hours ago time-ish,
All right,
yeah.
man.